today to have 4 individuals with us to talk about navigating city and township building processes. But first, let me give you just a few pieces of information as we get ready to get started. If you do have questions, we ask that you post them in the chat box. I'll be monitoring that throughout the session, and I will be giving those questions to our presenters so they can answer them for you. We also ask that you please mute yourself during the call just to prevent any feedback so we can better hear from all of our speakers today. And we will be recording this call, and we already are recording this call. And this will be available after the session today on both the Midland Area Community Foundation website as well as reliefmidland.org. All of the Zoom, the flood recovery update and connection Zoom calls are available on that reliefmidland.org website. So again, welcome. We're very excited to have you here today, and a very timely topic, one that I know many individuals around our community have had questions about, and that is navigating city and township building codes and processes. Let me introduce to you our speakers today, and then I'll turn it over to them to handle this for us. So first we have Grant Merschel, who is the Director of Planning for the City of Midland. We have Craig Gosen, who is the Township Supervisor for Edenville Township. We have Mike Wood, the Township Supervisor for Jerome Township, and Brett Spangler, who's a building inspector for Jerome Township and also the village of Sanford. So thank you all very much for being with us today. We appreciate the information that you'll have to share. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Grant Merschel from the City of Midland. Welcome, Grant.
Thank you, Sharon, and good morning, everyone. Happy to be here and happy to talk through some of these specifics about the city's building process, as well as some regulations that you're going to find as we go through the presentations today that are not just specific to the City of Midland, but actually are housed within the Michigan Residential Building Code and therefore apply to townships, especially when building in the floodplain. So there will be a bit of repeat information, but we're actually kind of excited that that's going to be available to be able to understand whether you're in the township or you're happen to be in the city. So with that, I do want to dive into the city side of things and be able to provide a little bit of a discussion about what it's like to navigate the city's building process and some of the important codes, big picture codes that have to be thought about when navigating permits and things for rebuilding and reconstruction after the flooding event. Today, of course, we have representatives from Edenville Township, Jerome Township, and then me from the City of Midland. This is a map that just equates you with those different jurisdictions. See highlighted here in green is the City of Midland with Jerome Township and Edenville Township off to our northwest. Village of Sanford, you can see highlighted just in the gray shade, just on the southern part of where Sanford Lake was previously. Next slide. So one of the most important questions you have to ask is whether or not your home or the structure of your home is within a delineated area called the 100-year floodplain. The 100-year floodplain is actually the AE zone on the FEMA flood insurance rate map, or FIRM, but that designates a specific risk area that is likely to flood. It has a 1% chance of flooding every year. The 100-year name is not a measure of how often it happens. That's something that we hear often from people in the community is how can we have a 100-year event rather frequently? It's rather a measure of probability. So it's a 1% chance that it would happen each year. But it's a special regulation area that's been adopted by the city and in the other cases, the townships. But it's important to know whether or not you're in or outside that area because there are specific implications depending on if you're in or if you're out. If you're living in the city, you can actually find this out fairly easily by going to the city's online GIS map, which can be found at the city's website, which is cityofmidlandmi.gov. You'll find the website to look just like you see here on your screen, and there's an icon just second to the left that says Maps. If you click on that icon, it'll pull you into another page, and you'll click on the interactive map, and that will lead you into the GIS online map that has a variety of layers that you can click on and off on the left side of your screen, and you'll be able to find the 100-year floodplain by going to Flood and then to the 100-year floodplain. I'll show an image here in a few slides that'll depict kind of what that looks like on your screen. But knowing where the 100-year floodplain is in relation to your property and specifically your home is important, because determining whether or not a part of your structure, your entire structure, is within that 100-year floodplain is something that city staff is required to do as part of reviewing building permit applications. But it's also something that you can find 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by going out to this online resource. So if your home is within the 100-year floodplain, there are special floodplain management rules that apply when you apply for building permits to do repair work after a flood. These rules actually apply anytime that work is being done on a home. And so it's a special area that's been adopted, and there we go. It's been a special area that's been adopted and applies specifically when you have a flooding event and there's a large amount of repairs that are going on. But these are actually regulations that apply consistently throughout the year. If you're not within the 100-year floodplain, you are still required to get building permits, but no special rules apply, and you can simply proceed through the regular permitting process. Next slide. So if your home is not within the 100-year floodplain, as exemplified by where this arrow is on the map, the question would be, how do I go about applying for building permits? I do want to stay on this slide for a little bit and speak to what you're seeing here with the different layers that are on. In this particular case around Gibson, Joanne, Belmont Street, you can see that 100-year floodplain has kind of a unique shape as it wraps around different areas. This is largely based off of elevation data back when the flood insurance rate maps were created. And so as you can see here, there's properties, neighboring properties, some that are partially within the floodplain, some that are entirely outside the floodplain, and some that are entirely within the floodplain. And that is the map that you would see when you go to the city's GIS, online GIS layer. So in this particular case, let's talk about that 3018 Joanne Street. And they are outside the 100-year floodplain, and what's the process that they would need to go through for building permits? Next slide. Here we go. So the best way to go about applying for permits is actually to visit the city's website, and specifically the building department page, which is cityofmidlandmi.gov/building. And on that page, you're going to find helpful information, including building permit applications that you can find, be able to fill out online, and then submit to the building department. With your permit applications, it's important to look at the attachments that are needed to be filed with those applications. So different drawings and other information for energy compliance and applicable codes. All of that is spelled out on those permit applications. And once you've completed them, you can actually bring them to City Hall, or you can mail them in to the building department, for which they would be entered into the system and then processed before we'd be able to review them and then issue those permits. Next slide. Permits can be pulled by homeowners and also by licensed contractors. So if you are a homeowner pulling your own permit, that is allowable by state law. You can come in and sign that permit application and be able to move forward with the work that's being done. If you're having a licensed contractor perform the work, it's very important to ask them for copies of the permits. One thing we're finding at the moment is that because of the scale of work that's happening within the community, we actually are finding that fairly reputable contractors are doing work unpermitted. And whether that's simply just wanting to do things a little bit faster or not have any delays, but it's very important that you ask for copies of permits from your contractor to ensure that they have had the work permitted and that they are having the proper inspections done if you're working with a contractor. Next slide. Non-permitted work is a violation of the Michigan Residential Building Code, and it could result in a fine from the city, both on the homeowner and on the building or on the building contractor. It's also important to recognize that if you do a large amount of work on your home that's unpermitted and uninspected, it could void your homeowner's insurance or render your home uninsurable in the future. So it's not that we're simply wanting to ensure that everyone follows our process because we're on a power trip. It's meant for safety. All of these codes are meant for safety. And it's very important that you go through and you have the proper permits pulled and therefore the inspections done, so that you can rest easy and know that there is quality control that's been done on the work that's been performed on your home. If you have questions as you go through the permitting application process and filling out those applications, you can call the City Building Department at 837-3383, and they are open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and someone would be able to answer your questions or get you in the proper, or to the proper inspector that can answer your specific questions on the applications. So next we'll move to properties that are within the 100-year floodplain, and specifically structures that are in the 100-year floodplain. There's a lot of properties within the city of Midland that have portions of the property that have the floodplain, but not their structure itself. The special rules that apply for floodplain compliance are for structures that are either entirely or partially within the 100-year floodplain, as shown here on the screen with 3113. Next slide. You can also go to the City Building Department website for more information about the 100-year floodplain and the special rules that apply. I know we have limited time today, so I don't intend to go through every single one of those, but we do have a video that's out there that can be watched to be able to answer some questions, some frequently asked questions about the special rules. One of the most important things to know is that when you do have damage to your property after a flood, and you are in the 100-year floodplain, you do have to go through what's called the substantial improvement, substantial damage assessment. The substantial damage assessment is to determine whether or not the structure has been damaged beyond 50% of its market value. And the way that the city has gone about that is actually asking for cost estimates to repair the home to previous condition and comparing that against city assessment records that have determined fair market value for the structure. That's different than your tax assessment because of course your tax assessment has an assessed value for your property and for accessory buildings and possibly pools or decks and other things like that. We're simply looking at the value of the home, and so the city assessor has been able to determine that value across the community for properties in the 100-year floodplain. If there is a disagreement with the value that the city has given, the property owner can ask for a licensed appraisal. They can hire a licensed appraisal to determine that value, to be able to see how it relates back to that 50% once we know how much work needs to be done through those cost estimates that have been prepared. So structures that are beyond the 50% of their value, that's where the strict floodplain compliance regulations from the Michigan Residential Building Code come into play. And so at that point, it's now a discussion about how we go about seeking compliance and what does compliance look like with that residential building code if the structure is damaged beyond 50%. If the structure is damaged below 50%, the next steps are actually fairly simple because you would simply proceed with applying for those building permits, and upon having everything that we need at the building department, we would then issue those building permits. If the damage is above the 50%, there are a few steps that we suggest that you take to start to think about what compliance will look like. The biggest thing with the floodplain regulations and seeking compliance with that is that the home itself, if it's damaged beyond 50%, rebuilding in that same location or simply rehabbing in that same location requires that the lowest level finished floor be 1 foot above the base flood elevation for that area. And the base flood elevation is the high water mark during a 100-year event. So depending on where you are in the watershed or where you are upstream from, say, the Tridge or other parts of the city, up Snake Creek or Sturgeon Creek, the base flood elevation is going to be dependent upon elevation area within that particular part of the city. That's actually a layer you can turn on within the city's GIS system to find the BFE. You would need to work with a licensed surveyor to obtain that elevation information, and that information would then be contained within what's called an elevation certificate. The biggest thing with the compliance is that the lowest level finished floor, as I mentioned, needs to be at least 1 foot above that base floodplain elevation. So if there's a basement, possibly compliance on homes could be simply filling in those basements and having the first floor be the lowest level elevation. That may involve relocation of critical infrastructure like hot water heaters and furnaces and ductwork. But all of that is going to be very specific to each individual design of the home and its relation elevation-wise to the base flood elevation. I did mention the video that we have out on the city's website. This is right on the main page of the building department, which is cityofmidlandmi.gov/building. And this is about a 9-minute video that has some frequently asked questions related to additional information that property owners should think about as they go about repairing or rebuilding within the floodplain. Within this video itself, we do talk about a specific permit that needs to be obtained if rebuilding is taking place in the 100-year floodplain, because the jurisdiction for doing new construction within the 100-year floodplain or substantial rehabilitation does require a permit from the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy at the state, or EGLE as they're known. And so there is a specific floodplain permit that does need to coincide with building permits if you are doing substantial rehab, bringing that property up to compliance, or are doing a rebuild within that same location. One thing I do want to talk about, because we are thinking long-term and we are thinking about, or should be thinking about, ways that we can further mitigate against risk and flooding events within the city, and that is flood insurance. So this is kind of the last piece that I have. And I want to talk about the importance of flood insurance because it is something that in the event or during an event or in a future flooding event, if you're insured and if you're not insured, it's a very different type of experience. I think the next slide will actually have a little bit more information as to kind of how that experience is a little bit different. There we go. Oh, one back, Emily. Thank you. So one thing I do want to make mention of is that any property within the city of Midland can purchase flood insurance. A lot of times we hear, well, I'm outside the 100-year floodplain, therefore I don't need flood insurance. And you may not be required to have flood insurance outside the 100-year floodplain, but you simply can purchase flood insurance so that you have a bit of risk coverage, since we have seen flooding events take place and there is a chance of flooding events taking place in the future. The difference that ends up happening when properties are insured versus uninsured is that in the event of a flood, payouts on flood insurance happen almost instantly. We did hear anecdotally from some folks in the community shortly after this event in May that they were having flood insurance, their flood insurance agents writing checks by the end of that same week to be able to cover damages that they had. If you recall, people that were uninsured had to participate in the individual assistance that only became available during a presidential disaster declaration many weeks or months after the event has happened. So if you are thinking that this is something that's likely depending on where your home is located in relation to the floodplain, if unfortunately you have had flooding events take place back in 2017 or 2013 or even in 2020, we strongly encourage you taking a look at flood insurance and seeing whether or not that is something that you could have on your property for the future. Flood insurance can be obtained through your insurance provider, and so we strongly encourage anyone that wants to find more information about flood insurance that they reach out to their private insurance provider and talk about their policy. It is important to recognize that homes that are outside the 100-year floodplain, they are less risky, and therefore the premiums are much lower than those within the 100-year floodplain. A lot of times there's a perception that flood insurance premiums are tens of thousands of dollars each year, or less, just slightly less than $10,000 each year. That's not always the case. Some homeowners that are maybe near the floodplain or have had repeat issues may find a very affordable insurance policy that's out there for them, and we'd encourage you to have that conversation with your insurance provider. One thing that I do want to make mention that's very important to recognize is that within the city of Midland, because of the city's floodplain management activities, all flood insurance premiums are discounted by 25% compared to market values. The reason why this is available to us is because we do have very strict rules that we follow each year, notification rules, as well as disaster response or flooding response that takes place. All of that is combined into information we submit annually and are audited every 3 to 5 years on. And when they come and they give us a rating on the efforts of our management activities, they then apply a discount depending on how well we've done. So the city of Midland is actually the only 5-star community within the CRS program in this state. And so as part of that, we have been able to achieve a 25% discount to policyholders within the city's jurisdiction. So that makes it even more affordable when considering that, as well as the riskiness depending on where the home is located. All right. And I think that concludes my portion of the presentation.
Great, thank you, Grant. And next we'll turn it over to Craig, the Township Supervisor for Edenville.
Hello, this is Craig Gozen. I really thank Grant for that excellent presentation. He went through a lot of information that also applies to Edenville and Jerome Township. The floodplain requirements are basically the same in all of our jurisdictions, and the Michigan Building Code as written in the SDSI evaluation for the greater than 50% or less than 50% damage into the building code. So that also applies to all of us. But in Edenville Township, we have a couple of specific things that are applicable to the residents here. You can go to the next slide. All right, the first thing is what we call a Z-Club. It is a zoning compliance and land use permit. That's something that can be obtained by contacting the Edenville Township office, and the phone number there is on the screen. There's a couple of key things that are evaluated as part of that permit. The first is whether the property and more specifically the dwelling is within the 100-year floodplain or not. And just for everybody that's on the line out there, if you are from Edenville Township, there are not a significant number of parcels in Edenville within the floodplain. In fact, we only have 8 that have dwellings on them where that dwelling is within the floodplain. So those special requirements don't apply to very many people, but it's something everybody should be aware of. And this Z-Club form that we've created and use is partly to determine, first off, whether you are or are not in that floodplain. Another key part of this evaluation is whether the homeowner is demolishing their structure and building a brand new structure as a result of the flood, or if they are maintaining the same foundation and just remodeling or fixing up flood damage interior to that. If you're using the same foundation, then we know that the setbacks and the other zoning requirements are either being met or are grandfathered in. So if the foundation is maintained, then it's an easy review process. If it's not, if the foundation is being torn out and a brand new structure is being built and it's moved somewhat on that property, then we do a greater evaluation and make sure that the new structure complies with all the zoning requirements in the township. Primarily, that means square footage of the structure, the setbacks from the road, the sides, and the back. Those are the primary things we look at. So that's step one. Once that's evaluated, we would then send that over to the Township Code Authority. The Township Code Authority is located in the County Services Building in Midland, and they handle all of the construction codes for the township. Another permit item that may be needed is either a well or a septic permit, and you can contact the Midland County Health Department if you were to need those. Now, when this goes over to the Township Code Authority, that's where the evaluation actually takes place. We let them know whether the structure's in the 100-year floodplain or not, so they know whether or not to do that SISD evaluation. For the folks in the floodplain, there may be EGLE requirements in addition to your construction codes, but like I mentioned, that would only apply to about 8 people currently. in Edenville Township. Next slide. So if we go through that evaluation and you're less than 50% damaged based on the value of the structure itself, just the normal construction codes apply. And if you're greater than 50% damaged based on that, then you do have to raise the structure to 1 foot above the base flood elevation. And the same stuff that Grant told you applies in this case as well. And then if you're outside of the floodplain, you know, normal construction codes apply. Next. So a lot of folks in Edenville have been asking about municipal water connections. In Edenville, this is somewhat of a complicated issue because of various special assessment districts that have been established to pay for the water mains. There's a couple of things that we would ask when a resident contacts the office about city water. One is we look at, is there a current line at the road, a transmission main? Yes or no. Another area we look at is whether or not that parcel is in a special assessment district and whether that assessment has been paid over the last 10 years or whether it's been paid off. There are a few sections of Edenville Township that have a water main, but the properties were in a voluntary assessment district. Those folks, if they haven't been assessed, would be required to pay a substantial connection fee to connect to city water. And then there's other areas that don't have any water mains at all. And if folks in those areas were interested in getting city water, it is a quite long, substantial process that begins with petition drives to establish special assessments. And that requires in excess of 51% of the acreage in those areas to approve a petition. And that just starts the process. It's typically 1 to maybe 3 years to get through that whole process. So if there's folks on the line where there's not city water available and their wells are going dry, city water would not be a short-term solution in those cases. It would be a much longer solution. So depending on where you're at, whether there's a transmission main in front of your house or not, that totally impacts how much it would cost to be able to connect. I can't get into all of the different scenarios, but I would recommend that you contact the township office and we can look into your particular situation and let you know what those costs would be. So first we evaluate at the township level. Then once the proper fees are addressed, either with assessments or connection fees, then we let Water District number 1 know what the status is. Then you would need to go to the Township Code Authority to obtain a plumbing permit, and then to Water District number 1 to get a permit for a connection to the water system. Next. And that's basically the process for Edenville Township. Basically, the first step is contact the township office, and we'll explain the process, figure out where you're at, and take it from there, explain where you need to go next and what permits might be needed. Thank you. Next is Jerome Township.
All right, thank you, Craig. And next up, we have Mike Wood, the Township Supervisor at Jerome Township.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm on here along with my building inspector, Brett Spangler. And I want to thank Grant for explaining all of the flood rules that apply for Jerome Township, Edenville Township, and the city of Midland. They're all identical rules that we all have to meet. Jerome Township is fairly fortunate that we have very few that fall into the 100-year floodplain. So basically, I'd like to touch on our general building codes. I know that's some of our residents in Jerome Township were affected by the dam failure and their houses were destroyed or significantly damaged during that event, but they don't fall into the 100-year floodplain. So a little later, I'll ask Brett to talk about how you go about that. But there's a few things I'd like to mention. In Jerome, of course, in the townships, as a slide showing here, we have different zones that apply. Residential, commercial, agricultural, all of those fall under different building rules. So when you're looking to build in Jerome Township, I would ask that you review this zoning map and see where your home falls, and then you'll have a better idea of how what building codes you're going to have to fall under, whether they be residential or agricultural. Setbacks and a few other items apply. There's just a few other things I'd like to touch on. For example, we have significant areas outside that are undeveloped altogether. To start with, if I get these calls quite often, if you bought a vacant piece of property, to get power or gas or any services like that, you immediately need a address. So to get an address on a piece of property, you would contact the Midland County Housing Commission, and they will assign address to a piece of property for you. As Craig mentioned, we do not have any city sewers up in Jerome Township, so all of houses would be on a septic tanks, and that is done through the Midland County Health Department to get your septic tank permit. Also, if you were building on a new piece of property and you needed a driveway permit, that is done through the Midland County Road Commission. So, and also we do have city water available to a large section of our township. And to get a city water connection, you would contact our Water District 1 office for that permit. So there's a few items I like to point out that if you're building in Jerome Township, if you're starting new, those are the items that you should look into getting for your property if you're considering buying one. I get those calls quite often as to, I'm looking at this piece of property, and I'm more than happy to explain all those steps at any time. If you go to my next slide there, what I'd like everyone to know is that our contact information is on our website, our jerometownship.org website. And if you go there, you'll find this listing. It gives every member of the township, every building inspector, plumbing inspector, mechanical, and plumbing and mechanical inspectors contact information, their email addresses. Please understand that none of our people work full-time doing this job. So if they don't immediately answer, please leave them a message and they will contact you back. And of course, my contact information is up there also. If there's any problems, which there rarely is, but you can contact me and I'll look into it for you. So those are just a few things I like to touch on. As Grant mentioned, we're not out trying to make money off a building permit. We ask that you get a building permit for your own safety. And also, if you're contracting with another contractor, it's a check to make sure that the job is done properly. We're not all building inspectors out there, so I would encourage you to get a building permit just so that you know that the contractor did what he's supposed to do. So at that point, I'll let Brett, if you don't mind, talk about, generally what you see in building and what's happened during our flood, if you don't mind.
Yep. So I'm not going to reiterate a whole bunch about the floodplain management because, like I said, all the building requirements for floodplain construction are the same as the city of Midland that Grant went through, and the same as Edenville. In Jerome Township, we really, like Mike said, we really don't have a lot of property in the flood zone A. The village of Sanford is obviously a totally different beast when it comes to flood zone construction. Because of the dam failures, we actually had, I honestly only have one residential property in the village that's still standing that was in the flood zone A. The rest of them were either taken out from the dam failures, or the damage was so significant that they ended up getting torn down. You know, there are some commercial buildings throughout Sanford that we actually are going through the process of the Eagle permit for flood zone construction right now. But as far as getting building permits, you know, I get notified either by a phone call, or you can pick applications up in our township office. Once the application is submitted, I review it for zoning, setbacks, size of the property, size of the house on the property. And then I also have to make sure if it's new construction, we get all the special permits, or extra permits, I'll call them, which is like the septic permit from the county, our water connection permit from water district number 1, make sure an address is assigned. And then after I review everything, you know, I'll give a call back to whoever the applicant is, make sure everything's covered, and then just issue the permit from that point forward. So like I said, I'm not gonna go through in detail any of the floodplain construction, because I think we've heard enough about that in this presentation. So with that, I'll just say, if you got any other questions, you know, I'm always available either through email, phone calls, or text. I return many calls every day with people having simple questions to, and sometimes I honestly don't have the answers to a lot of their questions, but I will always find out and get back with them as quick as I can. But with that, I'll just leave it as definitely give us a call, whether it's Edenville, Jerome, City of Midland, Lincoln, any areas, with any questions regarding the building permit process itself, and we'll be happy to walk you through it.
Great, thank you all. So just a few questions, and again, I encourage people, if you want to go to the next slide, please. I encourage people to type questions that you may have. A couple questions to start with here. With all the rebuilding taking place since the flood, and I know this will probably be answered by each of you, is there a delay in being able to get a building permit or to talk with someone about the issue? So I guess we could start with maybe city, then go to Edenville, then to Jerome.
Yeah, in short, there is a delay. It's not uncommon in times where we don't have a flooding event, or we don't have COVID that has delayed a lot of projects, that we were able to issue permits within a week's time, or possibly within a couple of days' time. At the moment, we're looking at more of a 4 to 6 week delay in some permits. That's usually larger scale things. If they're smaller scale permits and they're outside the 100-year floodplain, a lot of times those will be done in a little bit shorter fashion. But I've heard from the other gentlemen of the townships that we do encourage people's patience with us. Our staffing numbers are not extraordinarily high, and even in a regular time have had some challenges too. So just thank everyone for your patience. But what I can say is that when questions do come in, we do take them in at the order in which they're received, and then get back with those people at the time they're the order in which they're received. So we have a queue system that allows us to still keep everyone in line and getting back in the same manner that they came in.
Great. Okay, and then to I guess next to Edenville Township, this same question, delay in being able to get a building permit and what that's looking like right now in Edenville Township. Emily, you're going to have to unmute Craig, please. It's a 513 number.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, Craig.
All right. I'm not aware of any significant delays with the code authority and the building permits. There were early on when the big, slug of construction started. There's probably, some maybe a week or two, but I'm not aware of any significant delays. We don't have any backlog in the Z clubs for the township. We review those quickly. Usually its turnaround time is less than a few days, and that gets sent over to the code authority. So I don't believe there's any significant issues right now.
Okay, thank you. Mike and Brett, from your own township perspective?
Well, I'd like to touch on that. I'm sure Brett will tell us how he is right now, but after the flood immediately, people please understand that Brett is Jerome Township's building inspector. He's also the Village of Sanford's building inspector, and he has a full-time job. As you can notice, he's a lot younger than we are, so he's still working. So there is always that delay that the person has their personal life and their work life, and on top of that, they do our building inspecting for us. We're very happy to have him, and so at this time, I do not believe there is any delays. Is there, Brett?
No, I never. So right now, we're not experiencing many delays at all as far as issuing building permits. Some of the projects, if they're a little more involved or take a little more review, will get stretched out from the time the application is submitted. They may get stretched out, 7-10 days or so, just depending on the extensiveness of the project or what's involved in it. Most of them are being reviewed usually within 4 to 5 days. I'm getting a permit back to somebody. That being said, if it's in the flood zone, it's definitely a different beast at that point. We've been working on one permit in the village right now for 5 weeks. It's just there's a lot more to go through as far as check marks to take care of and dealing with the Eagle and stuff as far as getting all their permits straight. The only delay we really experienced through this, and we do experience a little bit of not necessarily issuing permits, but sometimes the inspections, just because they'll get a little backed up and like Mike said, I'm not really a full-time building inspector. I'm doing this after my normal job. So I do evenings, I do weekends, but I'm usually available 24/7. When people call, I'll usually answer, whether it's Saturdays, Sundays, 7, 8 o'clock at night, just to make myself available for everybody. We did experience some delay in probably June and throughout most of July or middle of July, just because the volume of damage assessments that were being done, especially through the village. We had actually quite a few in the township also. Even if we didn't have a lot of homes in the 100-year floodplain in the township, but there was still quite a significant amount of damage to houses, especially up along Lakeview Drive and through there. But we did have sometimes 4, 5, 6 day delay, and people would call just looking for damage assessments initially when the flood actually occurred. But I think we've worked through all of that at this point, and we're actually, most of the places we're back in the rebuilding phase. So I guess in summary, right now we're in good shape right now. We're not experiencing many delays at all.
Okay, thank you. Another question is the cost of permits being waived for flood survivors in your jurisdictions? I guess we'll start with city and then run through each of the townships.
So we did have waiver of permits as a result of the flood that took place until October 1st. That's a temporary waiver that we've offered after events like this. So at the moment, we do not have a waiver anymore, but what we did find was that the bulk of permits and work that was done within the community did take place within those months. And so so that waiver has ended, but if there are concerns related to that, I know that we can review it on a case-by-case basis, especially if we're looking at reconstruction and substantial rehabilitation.
Okay, thank you. How about in Edenville Township, Craig?
Yeah, from Edenville Township standpoint, the Z-CLUP that we issue at the township level, we did waive the fee, and it's still waived for flood reconstruction if you're reusing that same foundation. If not, if you're building a new structure and it's located in a different area on the property, then the $35 fee still applies. The rest of the permits are issued at the code authority level. They basically, those permit costs cover the cost to hire the various inspectors, and so they have not waived fees for those permits because they've got to pay their employees.
Great, thank you. Mike or Brett for Jerome Township, and Brett, I don't know if you can speak for the village of Sanford as well on this one.
Well, I'll speak for the village. I'll speak for the township, and Brett can speak for the village because he obviously covers both. Yes, Jerome Township did waive all the fees for flood damage repair. That would be building, electrical, and plumbing and mechanical till December 31st of 2020. So basically immediately after the flood, we had to make a decision on what we were going to do. And I went before the board, and the board chose to do that only for flood repairs in Jerome Township. Brett can speak on the village, what they do there, if you don't mind, Brett.
The village is exactly the same. We waived shortly the flood happened, actually days after the flood happened. We all got together and determined that we were going to waive all building, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical fees for flood-related repairs through the end of the year, identical as the township. And that's what we've been doing. Most of the permits for reconstruction have been issued at this point. So, you know, we're at the point, if you do have new construction that's not flood related, you know, fees still apply as they normally would. But anything that's flood related repair from damages caused from the dam failure were waived.
Great, thank you, thanks. Another question, if a homeowner is feeling overwhelmed and maybe hasn't yet begun much of the work, where do you suggest that individuals start? And I guess we could look at this from each jurisdiction's perspective.
I can start again.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead,
Yes.
Craig.
All right, from Edenville's perspective, the first place to start is to contact the township office. Make sure you have your address, maybe a parcel number, and we can look that up, determine where you're at, whether you're in the floodplain or out of the floodplain, and then we can recommend the proper next steps. So contact the township office first.
And that would be very similar for the city of Midland. We'd encourage you to reach out to the building department at 837-3383. And someone would be able to transfer you either to myself or to Steve Taglauer, our chief building official. But we'd be able to just talk you through some specifics and kind of give you some options for the next steps that you could take.
Great.
And Jerome Township is pretty much identical. If you're have any questions at all about the building process, please contact me. Brett and I have an agreement that I won't try and explain the building codes, and he won't try and explain township a supervisor job. So most of the time, if it's a very simple question, I'll try and help you with it. But the majority of the time, I will refer you to Brett, so you'll actually get the real information. But a little bit bigger on your question there is, if you're feeling overwhelmed, I also would recommend that you call 211 or contact the Midland County United Way, because there's lots of services out there that are done that's extremely generous by our community foundations that are out to help people. So simple building, electrical, plumbing, or you want to know a question about a zoning issue or anything like that, please contact us. And all other help, I probably would refer you to a 211 or the United Way of Midland. So
Great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
we try to be as available as we can, you know, as far as, because there's a lot of people that had a lot of damage and a lot of repair work that they're very unfamiliar with the rebuilding process or the repair process. So, you know, we're available as much as we can. I mean, I've got one gentleman in the village of Sanford that I've been to his site 6 times already, and we just got a foundation in, which is very not normal, but you know, these are special circumstances. So we're working with everybody as much as we can and try and help them out.
And I'd like to reinforce a message that Mike said, and that is call 211. And I'd also like to mention that we do have disaster case managers that are serving our community and available to anyone to reach out to. And I know we've got them on the line. So I'm wondering if one of you could just put that phone number, the disaster case manager phone number, in the chat box. Oh, there we go. Alicia just put it in. So it's 989-374-8000. So again, our disaster case managers are available. And honestly, I think with the being overwhelmed question, I know sometimes it's more than just the plumbing or the electrical. It's the whole situation and the emotional toll that it's taken. So I think that's where our disaster case managers can help with all aspects of recovery. So again, 989-374-8000, and they would be able to assist you and walk you through the process. I know that we still have folks too that are working through some FEMA appeals and working on that as well. So encourage you to continue to follow through on those. So I'm looking to see if we have any other questions from the group. If you'd like to type any additional questions in the text box here, we can ask our local officials that we have with us.
Shannon, I'd like to mention, I see Becca's on the line here too. Becca is a disaster case manager, and she works out of our township hall. She's here every day. She's a very nice person to talk to. So if anybody needs help, I encourage them to contact that number, and believe me, she's very good at what she does. So thank you, Becca.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks to Becca and all of our case managers for the incredible work that they're doing. And that's been, there are some things that were put in place to help individuals early on. And one was the hiring of these disaster case managers to serve our community and our flood survivors within our community. So we're pleased to have them working with our community and helping so many individuals. Other questions from the group? Okay, I'm looking in our text box. I'm not seeing anything. Well, I'll start to wrap up and we'll see if anything else comes through. I want to again thank all of those presenters today. Grant, thank you. Craig, Mike, and Brett, we really appreciate you taking your time and providing this excellent information, just the detail. And I think as you saw, it was very reiterated, because the same codes that have to be followed in the city in terms of, you know, the state codes are followed by our township. So I think it was helpful to see that consistency. and the regulations under which all of these folks have to operate. I think that's been helpful. And as you saw, there are some variations, but certainly the attitude of all is they're here to help and to assist you as you work through this process. So again, thank you very much for being a part of this call today. And as a reminder, this call will be available both on the Midland Area Community Foundation website as well as reliefmidland.org, so you can look at the recording of this call and review the information that was shared as part of this call today. So our next call will be coming up the first Thursday in November, right? That's where we are already, or sorry.
The 29th of October, sorry,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, the 29th of October will be our next call. And so we'll have information coming out about that. We appreciate you joining us for this flood recovery update and connection call. If there are specific topics you'd like to see us schedule and future calls, please reach out and let us know, and we'd be happy to address that. So again, thanks all for being a part of this today. We really appreciate your presentations, and thank you for the great questions as well. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye, thank you.
All right, goodbye. Thanks.